Thanks very much.
You too, David. Thanks.
With cooked jobs numbers and a net loss of jobs, can the administration still claim that the stimulus is working? Let's ask Democratic Representative Joe Sestak of Pennsylvania. He, by the way, is running for the Senate. More about that in a minute. And Republican Representative Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming. Both join us from inside the Beltway. Thanks for being here. Congressman Sestak, let me go to you first because... Yes. You know, you can do anything with numbers. Any economist will tell you can squeeze numbers to prove one thing or the other. But there has been a net loss of jobs. We're very happy the economy seems to be turning around, but we still have had a net loss of 2.6 million jobs since the stimulus plan passed. That's not good news.
Well, you know, I have to agree with the statements before. I have no idea why the administration early on wanted to create its own new system rather than using the standard figures that you and I use. For example, we know that the economy was torpedoed. So we tried to caulk the holes and stop and slow the hemorrhaging of jobs for the first 8 or 9 months. Has it worked? Yes. And you can see it by the regular numbers you and I use. For the first 3 months of this year, we were losing 700,000 new jobs every year, just losing them. Now we're down below 250,000 jobs losing each month. It's still intense, but it's not intensifying. Second, look at the yields. But just a year ago, Dave, when I was on, it was 6.5% was a yield for banks lending to each other, the federal rate they lend to one another overnight. Now we're down below 0.2%. My point is this. This bill was really a slow the hemorrhaging of jobs bill, and now the second half kicks in, the construction. We gave money to Medicaid, to Governor Rendell, who wasn't paying his Medicaid bills to hospitals, and nurses were being laid off. So we slowed the hemorrhage of jobs. Now is where the construction money, only 1/3 of which has been spent, kicks in to get that economy really going. But I just want to make it clear, Congressman, because you are a straight shooter, you're a former Navy admiral, we have to emphasize, and the fact is that you don't appreciate adding that word saved when you're talking about creating jobs because of the stimulus bill. No.
Okay.
We shouldn't have done it that way.
Well, Congresswoman Lummis, let me talk to you about the cost of these jobs, because every job that was so-called created by the stimulus plan came with a price tag, because the stimulus, as we know, was very expensive. We can put this up on the screen. For the 650,000 jobs that the administration says were created or saved, you talk about the money that was spent on it, $150 billion. That comes out to about $230,000 for each job. Now, when the private sector creates a job, it's about $40,000, $50,000, and it continues to add to the economy. Is this simply too much to pay for a job?
It's simply too much to pay for a job. And when we still have over 15 million people out of work, we have unemployment rising. Over 14 states are above 10% unemployment now. Some areas of some states are in the vicinity of 30 and 40% unemployment. The fact that people are going to businesses, the federal government is going to businesses and saying, you're not spending your money, so we're going to spend your money, and we're going to hire who we think should be hired, and we're going to take your money later.
Congressman Sestak, wouldn't it have been much more efficient to have devoted that $230,000 for each job to a tax credit for the private sector to create those jobs, rather than have these government jobs? We all know that government jobs are usually bloated and wasteful. Just give the money in a tax credit to the private sector. Let them create the jobs.
Now, I agree with you that we should have had another $150 billion of tax cuts for small businesses in it, but I don't agree with that statement on the whole. Here's why. We know, according to modeling, that every dollar you put into food stamps or unemployment benefits gives you a $1.73 kick in GDP. A tax cut gives you 40 cents kick in GDP. No. We needed that.
Actually, I don't buy that.
Moody's.com. My doctorate is in political economy, so I sat down and went through the modeling on Moody's.com. And
by that, hold on a second,
Congressman.
By that reasoning, you're saying that the government is more efficient than the private sector. Nobody buys that.
It is much more effective after you've been placed into a savage recession to kickstart us out of it. I'm not arguing in the longer term we want the government back out, but somehow we got into a Great Recession. We could have done nothing. And if we had, all modeling shows that in December we'd be at 13% unemployment, and 11% marks a Great Depression.
Congresswoman
so
Lummis,
what we did is salvage the damage.
Congresswoman Lummis, I love how Joe Sestak is honest about the accounting for the first part, but when you talk about the public sector being more efficient than the private sector, you've lost me. I'm not going there at all, and frankly, I don't think Americans are either.
No, I meant just when you're in the stimulus portion, not normally.
All right, we heard you. Go ahead, Congresswoman.
The stimulus bill that the Republicans sponsored would have created twice as many jobs and cost $315 billion less. But since we went with the Democrats' plan that had over 8,500 earmarks and all kinds of pork barrel spending, now the American people are going to have to pay that back. And they're going to pay it back in the form of more taxes. So we're going to take more money away from the private sector and give it to government in a failed attempt to create jobs under the Democrat stimulus plan. It was the worst of all.
And Congressman, you know, government services always cost money. They always end up, the money has to come from somewhere. Even if you get the Fed to create new money, that money comes out of the pocket and bank accounts of common folks in the form of devalued currency. So you're always going to spend more money when the government creates something because they take it right out of the private sector.
And it was a temporary shot.
Hold on a second, Congresswoman. Go ahead, Congressman.
Okay.
It's hard for me to take advice from a Republican leadership that doubled our debt from $4.5 trillion to $10 trillion, drove us into this recession. Now, all of a sudden, they have the magic plan? No, you have to step back. We were run aground. Actually, we weren't aground, we were torpedoed. We had to use the government, as they did in the Great Depression, as President Reagan did, spending 3% of our GDP to get us out of the S&L savings, that at those times you don't want to, but must have that kick to get you out of the damage that, quite frankly, President Bush and the Republican leadership placed us in. They were the leaders that did this. So I only say that because she asserts that her plan would be better.
The interesting thing here, though, Congressman, and I want to stick with you, Mr. Sestak, for a second here, is that right now, since the administration has claimed credit for what happened in the GDP, the great growth number that we saw yesterday, if those numbers don't hold up, they have to take blame for the economy going down afterwards, don't they? They now say the increase in GDP is because of the stimulus. If it doesn't continue, if you get bad fourth quarter numbers, it's your fault.
And, David, they're not going to hold up. The modeling shows that we will, unless something else is done, go to 2% growth for 2010. And that's what I think that the administration oversold, that this was a stimulus package initially instead of a stop the hemorrhage of jobs. We're going to grow probably 3% next quarter, but by the time we're in 2010, all modeling shows will be about 2%. That's the problem sometimes with politicians. They oversell.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I couldn't agree with you more. But Congresswoman Lummis, on the point of Republicans not having their own plan, you got to admit that the spending that took place in the Bush administration was so large it makes it tough for you folks to say, hey, we're the party of limited government. We don't believe in spending your people's money.
Republicans did overspend, and the Democrats' reaction to Republican overspending has been to double the deficit in 5 years and triple it in 10 years. The reason I ran for Congress, I'm a freshman, is because I was so disappointed in Republican overspending. Hopefully, the Republican leadership has learned its lesson, and when we take over Congress again, the kind of discipline that we need to instill will once again happen. But quite frankly, we're going to be dealing, if we are able to take over, with triple deficits just in the last 10 months.
Well, you're both very frank, and I want you to keep that frankness wherever you go. Joe Sestak, I know you're running for the Senate, and congratulations on your win, Cynthia Lummis. We hope you make a second one. Thanks very much for being here, guys.
Thanks,
Appreciate
David.
it.
Thanks, Cynthia.
So
Thank you.
Does
You're
the
welcome.
stimulus deserve any credit for turning GDP numbers